I hope my explanation wasn't too heavy, but it is an extremely important it's an extremely important paragraph to understand what Bhagavan is actually meaning to say here and why he's saying it. Now I see Jim, your hand is raised. Would you like to ask?
Yeah, thanks, Michael. Just listening to that, I found that really, really powerful, because I think the full import of what you've been teaching for ages about turning within really hit home to me there, because obviously the perception of the world and any questions we might have are in the realm of the ego or the mind.
Yes.
So by turning within, as you keep telling us to do, it's obvious that's all we need to do. I know it's hard, but by doing that, everything else just falls away, including the questions and the analysis and the ego mind and everything. So
everything, yes.
It's so simple. And yet it's because we like doing other things, but we just have to go back. So I totally appreciate that teaching, because the full import of turning within and why you keep talking about that is really just hit home to me. So I just want to say a massive thank you. Yeah. Very important.
Right. And what is the obstacle to our turning within? Bhagavan makes clear in later paragraphs of Nāṉ Ār, that is in the 10th and 11th paragraph, he talks about Vishaya Vasanas. Vishaya Vasanas means our inclination towards Vishayas. Vishayas means anything other than ourselves, anything that appears and disappears. All phenomena are Vishayas, all objects are Vishayas. So the world is nothing but Vishayas. The totality of all Vishayas is the world. And that includes not only the external world, but also, as I say, the internal world of thoughts and feelings and so on. All are Vishayas. So long as we have an inclination towards Vishayas, our mind will be constantly trying to go outwards, trying to hold on to both Vishayas, because Vishayas are the food on which ego lives. So it's only by attending to things other than ourselves that we are nourishing and sustaining ego. So the challenge we're up against, so long as because we all have strong Vishaya Vasanas, when we try to turn within, there's a strong urge to come out again, to attend to other things. So we slowly, by gentle but persistent practice, we have got to wean the mind off its taste for experiencing anything other than itself, because anything other than ourself is just a fabrication, a mental fabrication. It's a creation of our own mind, like everything we experience in a dream. And so long as we're experiencing anything other than ourselves, we're thereby sustaining this ego. So the only that Bhagavan has revealed the secret of everything. The whole thing exists because we see it. Now, because we see the world, because we look away from ourselves, all this is created. In order to free ourselves from all this, we simply have to turn our attention back towards ourselves. We say simply, it is simple. Bhagavan said nothing is easier than this, but it seems difficult so long as we don't want to. Though we all say, oh, I've come here only for moksha. Bhagavan once said, everyone who comes here says they come only for moksha. If I show a small sample of moksha, all the crows will fly away and I'll be left sitting here alone. That is, we say we want moksha, but we don't want to let go of the world. We want to have our cake and eat it, but we can't. We either have to eat it or we can keep it, but we can't have both. So we must be ready to leave the world, to give up everything other than ourselves, in order to be aware of ourselves as we actually are. So until we're willing to pay this price, this turning our mind within will seem to be a struggle, but it's a very worthwhile struggle, because as Bhagavan said, every moment we spend attending to ourselves, we are thereby strengthening the inclination to turn within and weakening the inclination to go outwards. So it's all at the level of our inclinations that the problem lies. So we have to cultivate that inclination to turn within and thereby weaken the inclination to go outwards.
Thank you very much. Very helpful.
There are a couple of questions which have been sent. Did you want me to read them?
Yeah, I think if you read them, that would be good.
Yeah. It says that I have been attracted to Bhagwan's teachings for 3 years now. We are told that Bhagwan has infinite compassion for us. When you are going through so much pain in daily life and others who seem to be full of themselves, not caring for others suffering due to their actions, and they're enjoying a good life, how do we know that this is Bhagwan's will? Why Bhagwan with infinite compassion would allow these things to happen? If it is Bhagwan's will, how do I know that Bhagwan exists? Honestly, I don't know that. I believe Bhagwan once said, don't believe anything that you don't know by experience. How can we develop clarity that Bhagwan is always with us and all that is happening is because of his will?
Regarding Bhagavan always being with us, what Bhagavan is that which is always shining in our heart as I. That is that the pure awareness I, the fundamental awareness I, that is the real nature of Bhagavan, and that is our real nature. So by definition, Bhagavan is always with us. We cannot leave him and he cannot leave us, because he is our real nature. He is what we actually are. Regarding difficulties, if you have a major illness, supposing you've got an advanced form of cancer, you go to the hospital and the doctors say, we have to operate. Are you going to complain? Oh, I thought you doctors were so compassionate, but now I've come here to the hospital hoping to be cured and you want to cut bits out of me? That's not compassionate. That is sometimes a painful operation may be necessary for a greater good. So whatever difficulties we undergo in our life, they are for our own benefit. We may not be able to understand how these difficulties which we are experiencing are for our benefit, but they are for our benefit, because that is to investigate and know ourselves. No faith is necessary. But when we begin to talk about Bhagavan's will, God's will, about grace and all these things, then we are entering the realm of faith. A certain degree of faith is necessary, but that faith is not just a blind faith. If we understand Bhagavan's teachings, that is, the core teachings of Bhagavan are totally logical and totally based on our experience. There are other elements of Bhagavan's teachings, but we can't verify from our own experience now at this moment and our present stage, but they fit in logically with the core principles. So it's perfectly reasonable to accept them on faith. So what we actually are, what Bhagavan actually is, because that's what Bhagavan is, our own real self, our own real nature. So what we actually are is infinite, eternal, and immutable. Because it's infinite, there's nothing other than it. So as we actually are, our nature is always to love ourselves. So we have infinite love for ourselves. And since nothing is other than ourselves, we love everything as ourselves. That's our real nature. But now, why we don't love everything as ourselves now? Because we've limited ourselves as this body. Bhagavan is our own real nature. So Bhagavan is infinite. He has infinite love for us, but he doesn't have love for us as the person we seem to be. He has love for us as we actually are, because he sees us as we actually are. Because what we actually are is himself, nothing other than himself. So because he sees us as himself and therefore loves us as himself, he wants for us only the greatest good. And the greatest good is only the annihilation of ego, because what we actually are is infinite happiness, infinite satisfaction. Dissatisfaction and unhappiness arise only because we've risen as ego. We can see from our experience. in waking and dream, we undergo so many difficulties, so many forms of suffering. But in sleep, in dreamless sleep, we don't suffer at all. We're perfectly content in dreamless sleep. The trouble is we pop out of it again. So we know from our own experience, when we don't rise as ego, we're perfectly happy, perfectly contented, perfectly satisfied. All problems arise only when we arise as ego. Why? Because when we rise as ego, we are limiting ourselves within the confines of a small body. So we're limiting ourselves in time and in space, and we're separating ourselves from all other objects, all other phenomena. So all sorts of problems arise because we have risen as ego. So what Bhagavan wants for us, what is Bhagavan's will? His will is nothing but the infinite love he has for us as himself. So what does Bhagavan want? If at all we're to say Bhagavan wants anything, he wants us to be as we actually are, because he knows only when we are as we actually are we perfectly happy. So Bhagavan's aim is to eradicate our ego, but he will not eradicate our ego until we are willing to. He's not going to kill us until we're ready to be killed. We must be willing to surrender ourselves, because otherwise it would be a form of violence. If so long as we want to remain as an individual, Bhagavan is not going to stop us. He's not going to say, no, I'm going to kill you. He will wait till we are ready, till we pray to him, Bhagavan, I want nothing else but to be killed by you, to be swallowed by you. Then only he will swallow us. So whatever happens in our outward life is happening by his grace, that is by the infinite love that we have for us, and it's therefore for our own benefit that it's happening. We may not understand how all these difficulties are beneficial for us, but this is where at least a certain element of faith is required. If you don't want to have that faith, okay, fine. You know you exist, that's sufficient. Cling to yourself. Forget about everything else. But the problem is when our mind comes out, we face so many difficulties. That's where faith is. There's no faith necessary to go within. But to survive so long as our mind comes outwards, faith is a great support, and it helps us to go back within again. So a certain degree of faith is appropriate for the outward turned mind. But the purpose of that faith should be only to encourage the mind to turn back within, because only when we turn back within are we clinging to what is real. I hope that helps to answer that question, at least to some extent. I mean, there's probably more that could be said, but unless it's actually a dialogue, it's difficult to follow up on it. So I don't know if the person who asked that question wants to come in and ask anything more, or shall we leave it at that?
I think you might leave it at that, because there are several questions which came in very early, actually. So there is one. So this says that I'm in an abusive relationship for more than 2 decades with no chance of getting out as such. I understand that this is a phase I need to go through, and I'm always looking for ways to handle whatever is to be in a graceful way. Would it be right to think of what I'm undergoing as prarabdha, and also assume that the abuser's abusing me is also his prarabdha? That makes it easier to remain neutral when facing rage, mockery, and intimidation. How can I keep my mind turned? The second part of it is, how can I keep my mind turned inwards while the actual abuse is happening, or at least not feel retaliatory rage or despondence that would create karma for me? Any tips would help. So the first is about whether abuse has to do with prarabdha on the part of both persons, and that might make it easier to handle the situation. And the second is whether it's how the mind can be turned inwards when in a situation where this is actively happening.
Okay. Yes, it is prarabdha. Nothing can happen to us that is not prarabdha. Prarabdha is one way of expressing it. Another way of expressing it, it is Bhagavan's will. That is, whatever happens to us according to prarabdha, yes, it is the fruit of actions we've done in the past, but we've done so many actions in the past why the fruit of certain actions have been selected for us to experience now. That is it's been selected by Bhagavan for our good. So as Bhagavan often said, whether we call it prarabdha or God's will, it's the same thing. So it's often more useful to consider it as God's will, because that's it makes it a bit I mean, particularly when we are undergoing great difficulties. And I sympathize with you because I spent more than 2 decades in an abusive relationship. So I know what it is, and I know how it is extremely challenging. But I wouldn't have survived if it hadn't been for Bhagavan's teachings. So Bhagavan's teachings support us in so many ways, and he make even the greatest difficulties bearable. But I know how difficult it is. I sympathize with you 100%. It is difficult to turn within when in an abusive relationship, because often in an abusive relationship, the most dangerous abusive relationships are where the abuse is covert, is very underhand. It's not openly abusive, but subtly abusive, where the abuser is challenging your sense of identity, your sense of your not just your sense of identity, your sense of reality. That is twisting what they call gaslighting, twisting the truth and making you doubt your own perception. So there are so many subtle forms of abuse which are extremely difficult to live with. So it is very challenging, but the very difficulty of the situation is a very strong motivation for us to turn within and cling to what is real, because ultimately what is real is only I am. So the more we can cling to Bhagavan's teachings, either in the form of self-investigation, clinging to I, or in the form of surrender, or Bhagavan, I can't bear this, you alone can protect me and help me to undergo all these difficulties with equanimity. So that is what Bhagavan, the clues that Bhagavan has given us, both for self-investigation and self-surrender, are both extremely helpful to us when we're in such a situation. So I don't say it's easy, but sometimes the most challenging situations are actually the most beneficial situations, where that is what we take to be favorable circumstances often lead to complacency. So it's often when we are undergoing difficulties in life, and difficult relationships are some of the most difficult things to undergo in life, that but we're facing the greatest challenge, and we are thereby that is the greater the challenge we face, the more we subside and cling to Bhagavan's teachings, the more benefit we derive thereby. And ultimately, though it seems to us the trouble is coming from the abuser, ultimately the trouble is coming from within us, not from the abuser. Why it is difficult to live in an abusive relationship? Because we don't like to live in an abusive relationship. We would much prefer to live in a harmonious relationship where people are kind, compassionate, considerate, and are not taking advantage of the other, not abusing the other. We much prefer that. So we definitely have a liking for non-abusive relationship. So it is natural for us not to like to be in an abusive relationship, but if we are willing to accept, okay, this is what Bhagavan has given me, this is for my own spiritual benefit, but Bhagavan is putting me through this, even the most unbearable situation can become bearable. So let us take it. Bhagavan is whatever difficulties we undergo in life, whether it's abusive relationships or illnesses or whatever it may be, there is not anyone in this world who isn't facing difficulties of one kind or another. It's the very nature of embodied existence to face difficulties. So whatever difficulties we face, they are only for our benefit, for to encourage us to turn within more and to remain unaffected by these things. So long as we have strong likes and dislikes, we are affected by whatever may be happening around us. The more we are willing to let go of our likes and dislikes, the more we're willing to efface ourselves, the easier it is to remain unaffected, even in the midst of abuse. But I'm not saying it's easy. Believe me, it's not easy at all. It is very, very difficult. But that is the challenge. If that is the challenge we are given by Bhagavan, then he is helping us in that form. Let's take it. He's helping us to progress spiritually by giving us these difficulties. I hope that helps to answer that question.
I'm sure it does, Michael. But the person who asked it, in fact, had to leave early. And I think it's really important that we sort of make sure that it's in the final recording.
Oh yes, definitely. I don't cut anything important out.
Great. There's another question, which this is for Michael and the group, and it says that if I, in quotation marks, if I am already I, how is a practice or a path necessary or even possible? Hope that makes sense.
If we are just I, no path, nothing is necessary, because I is fullness. I is perfect fullness. The problem is we are not aware of ourselves just as I. That is, our true identity is only I am I, as Bhagavan often said. But the problem is now we don't experience ourselves as I am just I. We are aware of ourselves as I am Michael, I am this person, I am this body. It is only for ego, that which is aware of itself as I am this person, I am this body, but all this spiritual teachings and spiritual practice are necessary. If we are remaining as I, that is all that is necessary. But the problem is we've risen as I am so-and-so, I am Michael. So for this fellow who's aware of himself as I am Michael, this spiritual path is very, very necessary.
And there's another question, which is, okay, so this says that my question relates to trying to grasp Bhagwan's teachings. Quite often, I feel that I have intellectually understood the underlying essence of his teachings, but I still continue to perceive the rope as a snake. Can you say something on the practice of Shravana, Manana, and Nididhyasana in removing this illusion? Thank you and peace.
That is, the illusion cannot be removed by Shravana and Manana. The illusion can be removed only by Nididhyasana. Nididhyasana means what Bhagavan is part of self-investigation. That is, the root illusion is our dehabhimanam, our identification of ourself with the body. So long as I mentioned earlier, so long as we're dreaming, we experience a dream body as I. So long as we experience a dream body as I, that dream body seems to be real. Because I am real, if this body is I, then this body is real. So whatever body we experience as I always seems to be real. The body we currently experience as I. And because this body is a part of a world, the whole world seems to be real. So while we are dreaming, the whole world seems to be real. Only when our identification with the dream body is severed, waking up from the dream, are we able to recognize, oh, it's all a mental fabrication. It was all just an illusory snake. So though we can understand conceptually, yes, all this is just an illusion. It's just an appearance. This isn't what is real. What is real is only I am. But all this continues to appear. And so long as it continues to appear, it seems to be real, and it seems to cause so many problems. So it is only in order to remove the illusion that it is a snake, we need to go, what is the, if you see a snake, if you see a rope and mistake it to be a snake, where does the problem lie? The problem lies in you, the perceiver. So the whole problem comes back to, yes, all this is illusory, but in whose view does this illusion appear? To whom is this illusion? To me. So it's only by investigating ourselves, the perceiver of this illusion, but we can eradicate the illusion. So long as the perceiver remains, the illusion will remain with it. That is the illusion, the very nature of the perceiver. Perceiver here means ego, the dreamer. The perceiver will always be aware of itself as I am this body. So it's only by investigating the perceiver. Investigating the perceiver is what is called nididhyasana. That is turning our attention away from all other things, back towards ourselves. That is the correct meaning of nididhyasana. What nididhyasana means is deep contemplation. Contemplation on what? Not contemplation on anything other than ourselves, because that is dualistic. If you contemplate on something other than yourself, there's duality there. We are following the path of Advaita. Advaita means not two. So what should we attend to? Not anything other than ourselves, to ourself alone. Only when we attend to ourself alone is there non-duality, because the one who is attending and the one who is attended to are one and the same. So the nididhyasana in the path of Advaita, in Bhagavan's path, is only attending to ourselves. So what relevance does Sravana and Manana have? They are very great aid. That is, reading Bhagavan's teachings and thinking deeply about them encourage us in so many ways to put them into practice. They first help to clarify our understanding so that we clearly understand what the practice is, and they encourage us to put it into practice. So whenever our mind comes out, we should try as much as possible to keep our mind dwelling on Bhagavan's teachings, whether by reading or by listening to them or by just thinking about them in our mind. That is reading or studying or listening to them. That is Sravana. Manana means thinking about them very deeply, understanding the connections, why Bhagavan says like this here and like that there, what is the connection, and getting a coherent understanding. That is gained by Manana. These two are both necessary as a support, and the more we put his teachings into practice, that is, the deeper we go in the practice, the clearer his words, the deeper and clearer meaning we will see in his words. So it's not that we first do Sravana, and after completing Sravana, then we do Manana, and after completing Manana, then we do Nididhyasana. It's not like that. It is an iterative process. That is, we do much, like the main thing we should aim for is the nididhyasana, the actual practice of turning our mind back within. That is the main thing. Every time we turn our mind back within, we are thereby purifying and clarifying our mind. Then when we read his teachings, we see deeper and clearer meaning in them. So the Sravana, Manana, Nididhyasana are to go on till the very end. That is, whenever we allow our mind to come outwards, we should try to keep it dwelling on Bhagavan's teachings, which will encourage us to go back in again. I hope that answers that question. But
thank you, Michael.
The rope will continue appearing to be a snake until the seer is, the perceiver of it is eradicated. That perceiver is ego. So we will continue seeing ourselves as this world until we see ourselves as we actually are.
Thanks, Michael.
Right.
Michael, I think there's one more question on the chat before the 3 questions with the raised hands. And then there are 2 more questions in the chat. So I'll just give this one question and then you might want to go ahead with the raised hands. So this question is that could you clarify Eika Jiva Vada in light of Bhagwan's teachings, and how is it different from Solipsism?
Right. Eika Jiva Vada means there's one Jiva. What Jiva means, generally Bhagavan used the term ego, but he made it clear, but what is called Jiva is nothing but ego. For example, in verse 24 of Uludunapadu, what he says in that verse is, Jadu Udul Nāṇ Ār, this insentient body doesn't say I. That's a metaphorical way of saying the body is not aware of itself as I. Satchit Udiyadu. Satchit, that is being awareness, the real awareness, doesn't rise. In between, one thing, I, rises as the extent of a body. That one thing that rises the extent of a body, in the next sentence, he goes on to say, this is Chit Jada Granti, but not that binds the Chit and Jada together, the sentient and the insentient. It is, wait a second, I'll just get the verse, just to remember the order in which he gives the idea. This is Chit Jada Granti, bandham, it's bondage. Jiva is the Jiva, Nupame, subtle body, Ahande, ego, Ichamsara, this samsara, manam, mind. So this one thing called I, but rises as the extent of a body, this is Jiva, and it is Ahande, it is ego. So, and it's also mind and Chitjaragranti and bondage and everything. So when Bhagavan talks about Eika Jiva Vada, Eika Jiva means there's only one ego. How are we to understand this? Consider a dream. In a dream, you see many people. And so long as you're dreaming, all those people seem to be seeing the same world you're seeing. And you can even have conversations with them. We could have conversations. Sometimes we may have conversations about Bhagavan's teachings with people in our dream, and we may try to explain to them what Bhagavan's teachings are or something. Those people seem to be as sentient, as aware as the person we seem to be. While we are dreaming, we seem to be a person in that dream. So it seems to us that dream person is seeing the dream world. And because that dream person is seeing the dream world, all the other dream people are also seeing it. When we wake up, what do we understand? We understand all those other people are just our mental creation. They weren't seeing the world at all. Not only the other people, even the person we seem to be was a mental creation. What was actually seeing the world was not the person, it was ego. Because ego identifies itself as a person, as a body, it sees every other person, every other body as an ego. So it seems to us that there are many egos, and therefore all those other egos are perceiving the world just like we are. But actually, all those other seeming egos exist only in the view of the one ego who is dreaming all this. So who is the one ego? Who is the Eika Jiva, the one Jiva? Who is aware of the world? That one who is aware of this world, that is the Eika Jiva. And as Bhagavan said, for example, in verse 26 of Uludunapadu, Ahande undayan anatam undaham. If ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. Ahande indrail indra anatam. If ego doesn't exist, everything doesn't exist. Ahande yavamam. Ego itself is everything. Therefore, investigating what this ego is giving up everything. So from that verse, we can very clearly understand there's only one ego. Why? Because as Bhagavan, Bhagavan teachings are all consistent. When he says this world is a dream, in a dream, how many perceivers are there? So long as we're dreaming, there seem to be so many people perceiving the dream world. When we wake up, we recognize, oh, I alone was seeing that dream world. It was all in my own mind. So you ask about solipsism. solipsism is understood in different sense by different people. Some people think solipsism means I am the only person. That is obviously absurd. When we look out, there are so many other people, so we are not the only person. What Ekajivavada is a form of solipsism, but a much more subtle form of solipsism. It's not saying this person is the only person. It's saying that ego which takes this person as I, that is the only ego. That is the only perceiver. So all this exists in the view of that one ego who mistakes itself to be a person. The truth is, no person ever perceives anything. The person is made up of what? Of the 5 sheaths: body, life, mind, intellect, and will. These 5, as Bhagavan says in verse 22 of Upadeshundya, these are all jada. They are not aware. When he talks there of mind, I mean, when mind is described as one of the 5 sheaths, mind there doesn't mean mind as the perceiver. It means mind as the all the other thoughts that constitute the mind. So all the objective elements of the mind are called mind. The intellect is the judging and discriminating element of the mind, and the will is the all the vasanas constitute the will. All these are other than ourselves. That is, intellect is an instrument used by us, but intellect itself is not sentient. What is sentient is the ego that identifies itself with that intellect. The will consists of vasanas, which sprout as desires and so on. Those vasanas or those desires are not aware of anything. What is aware of, I want this, I have desire for this, that is ego. So ego has misappropriated all these 5 sheaths and collectively takes them as I. And so it seems to ego, but this body is sentient and mind is sentient and we're seeing all this. But what is actually sentient, what is actually perceiving all this is only ego, not the person we seem to be. So it is true, there are so many people in the world. When we look outwards, we identify ourselves as a body. So, but all the other people we see are as real as the person we seem to be. Now, because I take myself to be Michael, I'm so concerned about Michael. I want Michael he should have, every day he should get his food, he should have a comfortable place to stay, he should be protected from the elements, he should have warm clothes to wear, or he should have a roof over his head. I take so much care of Michael because I mistake myself to be Michael. All the other people I see are as real as Michael. So it is, though this is all a dream, though I am not Michael and none of these other people are real, so long as I take myself to be Michael, these other people seem to be as real as me. So I should be as considerate about other people as I am about me, about this person I take myself to be. So if I'm so concerned about Michael, I should be equally concerned about other people. So because the Ekajivavada, as taught by Bhagavan, is a form of solipsism, but it's an extremely refined form of solipsism. The grosser forms of solipsism can lead to narcissism, can lead to selfishness, being self-centered. Oh, I'm the only person, so other people don't matter. They're all just my dream characters. The person we take ourselves to be is also a dream character. So we need it. The Ekajivavada is taught to us by Bhagavan to help us separate ourselves from the person we seem to be. So how can we apply Ekajivavada in practice? Only by turning within to investigate ourselves. So long as we're looking outwards, in effect, there are many people. And every person seems to be an ego, so there seem to be many egos. But all those many egos exist in whose view? Only in the view of this one ego. So Bhagavan does teach solipsism, but it's a very deep and refined form of solipsism. And it's a solipsism not intended to change our outward behavior. It's solipsism intended to turn our attention within to investigate, who am I, this one Jiva? That is the aim of Ekajivavada as taught by Bhagavan. That is, Bhagwan's basic teaching is all this is a dream. If all this is a dream, in a dream there's only one dreamer. So the Eika Jiva Vada is implied in Bhagwan's teachings. That sometimes Bhagwan explicitly said, yes, Eika Jiva Vada is what he teaches. But that is only meant for those who are willing to turn within. We shouldn't go and tell the world, oh, you're all my, you're all only my own mental creation. This is a dream. I am the dreamer. It is not for that purpose. The purpose why Bhagavan taught Eika Jiva Vada is to help us to turn our mind within, to investigate, who am I, this one Jiva? I hope that helps to answer that question. So Ash, you were first.
Thank you, Michael, for taking our questions. I have two questions, I think, but the first one, I think you have just answered it. And that is with regard to the snake and the rope. So I think what I hear you say is that the rope, we see the rope on final self-realization, and we continue to see the snake, even though we are practicing and paying attention to the eye, until we finally realize ourselves, we are seeing the snake. Is that correct?
Yes. That is the way this analogy is usually used. It is usually used with reference to the world. That is, the Brahman is the rope, and it appears as the world, which is the snake. That is the sense, the context in which it is usually used, and it's also used in this paragraph in that sense. We can also apply it in another way, in which we can extend the analogy still further. If we take our real nature, Brahman or Atma-vichara or whatever we call it, the pure awareness that we actually are, if we take that, I mean, that is always what is meant by the rope. As I say, usually the world is taken. But what is the world? The world is nothing, as Bhagavan makes clear, is nothing but our perception of it. So who is the perceiver of it? So we can take, rather than the world that is perceived, one who is perceiving it to be the snake. If we take it in that sense, in other words, if we take ego to be the snake and our real nature to be the rope, we can then apply this same analogy in a very nice way. If you see a rope and mistake it to be a snake, the only way to get rid of that snake is to look at it very carefully. If you look at it very carefully, you will see, oh, it's just a rope. And as soon as you see it's just a rope, the snake thereby disappears. Likewise, if we take ego to be the snake, if we look at this ego very closely, what do we see? The ego means ourself. If we look at ourselves very closely, we will see we are just pure awareness, and thereby ego will be eradicated. So that's a very nice way of applying this, a very practical way of applying this analogy. Taking ego to be ego and all its perception. The whole bundle is the snake, but the root of that is its ego. If we investigate this ego, we will see what we actually are, and thereby ego will be eradicated. On the other hand, if we investigate the world, however much we investigate the world, we're never going to see we're never going to see Brahman, because Brahman is what we actually are. Until we see Brahman in ourselves, in other words, until we see ourselves as Brahman, we cannot see the whole world as Brahman. So what we need to investigate is ourselves. Even though now we seem to be ego, doesn't matter. If we investigate now, the rope seems to be a snake. Doesn't matter. Just look very carefully at that snake, and then you'll see what it actually is, which is just a rope. Likewise, look very carefully at this ego, and we will see what we actually are. So that's another. It's not the usual way in which the analogy is used, but it's a way that is very much in tune with Bhagavan's teaching. Because according to Bhagavan, all we need to do is to investigate this ego, and thereby we will find out what we actually are. Because the ego is nothing but a superimposition upon what we, just like the snake is superimposed on the rope, ego is superimposed. Ego is the mixed awareness I am this body is superimposed upon the fundamental awareness I am. If we investigate this I am, that it will penetrate through ego and go back to the original source, which is that fundamental awareness I am, which is what we actually are.
Thanks, Michael. That makes sense. So until the final realization, we will continue to see ourselves as the ego.
Yes. There's no halfway. Either we see ourselves as we actually are, or we see ourselves as something other than what we actually are. What sees itself as something other than what it actually is ego. When we see ourselves as we actually are, then we are as we actually are. That is, pure awareness alone knows pure awareness. So in order to know pure awareness, we must be pure awareness. That's why Bhagavan says in verse 26 of Upadesha Tanai iritale, tanai aridalam. Being oneself alone is knowing oneself. There, oneself means what we actually are, our real nature. So only when we know ourselves as we actually, only when we remain as we actually are we knowing ourselves as we actually are. What we actually are is just pure awareness. Arive Nāṇ, as Bhagavan said, answers Shiv Prakashan Pillai's first question. So awareness alone is ourself. Awareness there means pure awareness. It's only by being pure awareness that we can know pure awareness. As ego, we can never know pure awareness because ego is that same pure awareness mixed and conflated with adjuncts. So it's only by being the pure awareness that we actually are that we can know what we can know that pure awareness. And as soon as we know ourselves as such, ego is thereby eradicated.
Thank you, Michael. So this kind of ties into my second question. So from the personal experience of the practice, because we are paying attention to the subject, not the objects, and
Yes.
we're so used to looking at the objects, it's so enticing. So when you try to pay attention on the knower, the experiencer, you find that you can hold on to it for a bit, and then it goes away. And then the pointers that Bhagavan has given us, to whom, to me, who am I, kind of brings you back to the knower, and you stay there. And it's a kind of like, it's a in out. So
Yes.
my question then is that, it's very easy, because from past spiritual practices to we are so object addicted that we try to hold on to some kind of object and think it's the I. And then you got to remind yourself, okay, if you're experiencing this object, it cannot be you. So who's experiencing it? And you go back to it, and it goes on. So, and this is actually the devotion to the self, right? Because that is the awareness is the self. So I'm thinking that the attention on the knower, the I am, does it have to be constant, where there is no inclination to shift to objects? Is it that stage where then grace comes in and takes the final step and annihilates the dream and the dreamer, and there is only the self?
Bhagavan said, grace is the beginning, the middle, and the end. It is grace that has attracted us to this path. It is grace that is sustaining our interest, our love for following this path. And it is grace that will finally swallow us. The inclination to go outwards will remain till the end. It's just that inclination to go outwards is what are called Vishaya Vasanas. By our practice, we are weakening the Vishaya Vasanas. We cannot destroy the Vishaya Vasanas entirely without destroying their root. In other words, what is called Vasanakshaya, the destruction of Vishaya of Vasanas, is nothing but manonasa, the destruction of mind or ego. So it's only by eradicating ego that we can completely eradicate all Vishaya Vasanas. So these Vishaya Vasanas will be with us till the very end, till the ego is annihilated. But the more we put this into practice, the more the Vishaya Vasanas are weakened. And correspondingly, the more our Satvasana, our love just to be as we actually are, is strengthened. So as our Vishaya Vasanas become weakened, we become more and more willing to surrender ourselves. And when we are finally sufficiently willing to surrender ourselves, then we will turn within the full 180 degrees, and that is the moment at which grace will swallow us. Our turning within 180 degrees and grace swallowing us, though for descriptive purposes, we talk of them as if they're two different things, they're one and the same thing. I can't remember where, but somewhere in Guru Vachika Kavai, there's a verse in which Bhagavan says, I can't remember the exact meaning, but it's something to the effect. Is the mind first purified and then Shiva enters the heart? Or does Shiva enter the heart and thereby the mind is purified? Something like that. And Bhagavan says, to people who ask such questions, we have no answer, because they take Shiva entering the heart and the purification of mind to be two different things. They're one and the same thing. Likewise, our turning 180 degrees and grace swallowing us, they are one and the same thing. So yes, we will be swallowed by grace only when we turn 180 degrees. But the mere turning of 180 degrees is for being swallowed by grace. That is, it's not two separate things that are happening there. It's one and the same thing. But the more we are willing to surrender ourselves, that is, the more we weaken our Vishaya Vasanas, the closer to 180 degrees we will come, turning 180 degrees we will be able to come. So we'll be coming closer and closer to surrendering ourselves completely. But only when we turn the full 180 degrees do we thereby surrender ourselves completely, and are we thereby swallowed by grace. Does that is that clear, yes, what I said?
Yes, Michael, that is very comforting and encouraging, right? Because when you said that example that you gave, is it the grace? Does that come before and then that happens, or do you do the work and then because so I think when we get to this point, even I think in the case of Nāṉ Ār and Sadhu Home, they all didn't feel that they were they had merit. And
yes,
you feel so that you feel so helpless and hopeless and unworthy, and you're not going to make this, right? So it's comforting to know that
the more worthy we become, the more we will be clearly aware of our unworthiness. That is, the purer the mind becomes, the more even the smallest dirt will stand out as a very big dirt. So you can see that in Bhagavan's Aksharamala and other hymns of Arunachal Stuti Panchakam. Bhagavan is referring to himself as the worst of the worst. That is, Paramanim Padum Patrarap Patrum Paravari Variaril Paraman. He says in Arunachala Patikam. That is verse 9. Paramanim Padum Patrarap Patrum Paravari Variaril Paraman. That is, Bhagavan says, I am the Supreme in being devoid of supreme wisdom to cling without attachment to your feet. That is, among all those who lack that wisdom to cling to your feet, I am the foremost of them. That is, he's saying he's the worst of the worst. So that we will really, that the more our mind is purified, the more clearly we'll be aware of how strong our Vishaya Vasanas still are. That is, the more they're weakened, the more clearly we'll become aware of their strength. And so we will really feel we are the worst of the worst. That is the nature of things. And finally, those who attain they never say, I did this sadhana and thereby I attained. They say, I did nothing. This grace came and swallowed me. Why? Because when ego is destroyed, all doership is destroyed with it. So the true sign of a jnani, anyone who says, I did sadhana and I attained, you can be sure they haven't attained. They may have attained something, God alone knows what, but they haven't attained annihilation of the ego. Because when ego is annihilated, there is no one left to say, I did sadhana, I did self-investigation, and thereby I attained, or I surrendered myself. To say I surrendered myself is a complete mockery, because so long as there's an I to say I surrendered, we haven't surrendered, because it's that I that has to be surrendered. So when we surrender is complete, we will not feel we have done anything. We'll feel, everything was done only by grace. That's why Bhagavan said, grace is the beginning, the middle, and the end. But so long as we rise as ego, we have that sense of doership, and therefore it is necessary for us to play our part by turning within. By turning within, we are thereby surrendering ourselves. We are yielding ourselves to grace. So by turning within, we are refraining from obstructing the work that grace is doing for us. So that's why we need to turn within more and more and more. The more we turn within, the more we subside. The more we subside, the more grace is able to do its work unobstructed.
That's very true, Michael. Like from personal experience also, I can see, whenever, you pray, you practice, you read, you listen, you contemplate, you reflect, and you still feel, you don't know, you're just not there yet. You find there's so much deficiency there. And then you find that some teaching comes along or something comes along that is exactly adapted to what you need at the time.
Yes.
And that gives you encouragement, right? Because
Yes,
otherwise, when you feel that you're even in a worse state now than you've been before, it's very easy to get discouraged and say, I don't think I'm progressing. Maybe I'm so bad, or that I cannot do anything. So it's it really helps that at the right time you need something that Bhagavan's grace presents something to you that helps.
Yes. As Bhagavan said, grace is the beginning and the middle and the end. Whatever we are doing, we're doing it only by grace. Even the effort we are making to turn within, it is only grace that is motivating us to do that. So finally, when ego is destroyed, we will truly say, I did nothing. Everything was done only by grace.
So quickly, one final thing, Michael, is that, so I know the student cannot gauge progress. It's only the sage, the teacher's job is to assess the progress, and the effort cannot be done by the teacher, it can only be done by the student. But with regard to, when we say that to turn 180 degrees, and we mentioned about grace, that, it's a combination of both, that if you are constantly unwavering attention on the self, is that some gauge on the progress, or it can happen at any time, whether you're not even reached that stage?
If your attention is unwaveringly on yourself, you won't even be thinking, I am making progress or anything. That is, the thought I am making progress or I am not making progress is something other than ourselves. It's only when we allow our attention to go away from ourselves that all questions whether we're making progress or not arise. That's one thing. The other thing is, yes, we have to play our part, but it is not correct to say that Guru cannot do anything. Bhagavan is doing everything. Even the effort we are making, it is Bhagavan who is. It is because of the work that Bhagavan is doing, pushing us to turn within. So everything is being done by grace, but it seems to us that we have a role to play. Our role is to yield ourselves to grace. In order to yield ourselves to grace, we have to turn within. The more we turn within, the more we subside, the more grace can do its work. But ultimately, everything is done by grace and grace alone. Because what is grace? Grace is the infinite love that we, as we actually are, have for ourselves as we actually are. That is the beginning, the middle, and the end. That is what starts us on this path, and that's what leads us along the path, and that's what finally swallows us.
Thank you so much, Michael. Thank you so
Everything
much.
is done by him. Everything is done by him without him doing anything. That is by his mere being as he actually is. Grace is, or the action of grace, it happens automatically by the mere presence of Bhagavan, by the mere being of Bhagavan. His very nature is grace. So everything is happening without him doing anything. It's happening by his mere presence. As he said very beautifully in the 15th paragraph of Nāṉ Ār. He gives the analogy of the sun that rises without Icha, with Icha Yatna, without liking or effort or Sangalpa. The sun rises and everything happens in its mere presence. Likewise, by the mere Sannidhi, Isan Sannidhi Visesha Matrital, by the mere special nature of the presence of God, everything is happening. So Bhagavan does everything, but never does anything. He does everything by doing nothing. So our mind cannot grasp it. It sounds paradoxical, but that is the truth.
So very, very encouraging, Michael. So very, and thank you for being an instrument in the hands of Bhagavan. Thank you so much.
You can't thank the instrument. You have to thank the one. And whether I'm a good instrument or not, I don't know. But it's all thanks to Bhagavan only.
Thanks to Bhagavan. Thank you.
He can use even the most hopeless instrument to do the most wonderful things. So the instrument is incidental. The one who is wielding the instrument, that is the one to whom we need to be grateful.
Thank you so much.
Right. And then David.
I feel absolutely exhausted. I wonder how you feel. I'm just listening to you when you're doing all the talking. Wow.
I'm not doing it. All doing is done only by Bhagavan, without him doing anything.
I try to think about that. I'm not the doer. Yeah. So I think you've answered the questions really in your way, but I wondered if I can approach things from a slightly different way, being very practical, being a Capricorn. You talk about giving up this world and turning 180 degrees, and it's all a matter of perception and questioning what is existence and investigating ourselves. Now, for me, I've thought about this on a sort of scientific level, that my body and everything around us is just molecules and protons and electrons and wavelengths, and it's all just moving so slowly sometimes that I can't even perceive it. I look at the skyline in London 20 years ago, it was completely different, but there's this picture of London, but it's always changing. Everything's changing. And so I've been trying to think of, instead of my ego going out, thinking of all this stuff as coming into me, and for me perceiving rather than being the one giving out my ego. And on a practical level, how do you actually start to challenge who you are? I mean, you talk about the physical body. There's also the social body. And I've been thinking about how we are so brought up into thinking we're families and a mother, and, you know, the baby and grabbing the breast, and then the baby changes and grows up and the mother has a different role to play. And there's all these different roles of social bodies that we also exist to. So constantly it's perceiving, and it's all about a matter of perception. On a practical level, am I going the right way, or is this, well, I don't know how I'm dealing with this.
The basic identification, we identify ourselves with this body. If I am this body, then this body was born in a certain family, in a certain society. There are so many other identifications. We we have a national identification, we have a religious identification, we have a racial identification, we identify with so many things. We may have a certain political affiliation, so we identify with a certain political party or a certain political outlook on life. So there's so many identifications that we have, but all of these are rooted. The basic identification is our identification with ourself as this body. When this body dies, when we separate from this body, why even wait till death? Every night when we fall asleep, all our identification, because our identification with this body is severed, all our other identifications are severed. In sleep, we don't identify ourselves as anything. We don't think I am a man or I'm a woman. We don't think I am white or black, or I am Christian or Muslim or Hindu or whatever. All identities is lost when we lose this root identity, the Dehabhimana, the identification of ourselves with the body. So that is the root problem. Regarding the world, yes, it seems to us that the world exists out there, and that the light comes in through our eyes, the sound comes in through our ears. So the world is entering our mind, we think. But exactly the same seems to be the case when we are dreaming. We seem to be perceiving a world that exists out there. But when we wake up, we recognize that world existed only in our mind. Even now, this world, including our body, all exists only in our mind. So nothing exists independent of us. Nothing can be there. Without perception, without perceiving, there is nothing perceived. And without a perceiver, there is no perceiving. So the perceiver is the root of everything.
I think I understand most of this, but what I've been thinking, when I go to sleep, I realize I've been very aware of what I actually do. I get into bed, I relax, I get myself comfortable. I'm aware of my breath calming down, my blood flow calming down, my mind quietening, and I'm going slowly, and I get to a place where suddenly the switch goes off, and I'm asleep. And I'm thinking, well, how can I do this in the daytime and stay aware? How can I calm my breath and my body and my mind and get to that same place, but be aware?
Okay. What happens when we fall asleep? Because that is throughout the waking and dream states, our mind is active, projecting all this and perceiving all this and doing things. So we have energy to do this only for a certain period of time, and then we become tired. So because of tiredness, because we no longer have the energy to continue all this mental activity, mind subsides due to tiredness. So we enter that state of sleep in which we are not aware of anything. There's no mind, no world, nothing. But because the mind entered that state because of tiredness, as soon as it's re-energized, it pops up again. So that is not a permanent solution. How to bring about that in waking state? What we want to bring about that, we want to withdraw our attention from everything else, but merely withdrawing our attention from other things is not a solution. It's only a temporary solution. In order to bring about the permanent dissolution of mind, we need to be aware of ourselves as we actually are, because the mind is nothing but the false awareness. I am Michael, or I am, sorry, I've forgotten your name.
Correct.
Lorraine, yes, I am Lorraine. That mind is just that false awareness that is aware of itself as I am Lorraine. So merely when you fall asleep, you let go of everything, including Lorraine, and so you're in sleep. But the root, that ego that identifies itself as I am Lorraine, is, though it temporarily disappears there, it isn't annihilated. In order to annihilate that, because ego is the false awareness, I am Lorraine, only by being aware of yourself as you actually are can you eradicate ego. Can you permanently separate yourself from Lorraine or from any other person? Because when the bodily lifetime of Lorraine comes to an end, you'll no longer feel I'm Lorraine, but some other dream will come and you'll identify yourself with some other form and name. But the problem is that I that identifies, the ego who grasps all these forms as I, that is the problem. If we investigate this ego keenly enough, we will become aware of ourselves as we actually are. That is, how do we investigate ourselves? By turning our attention back towards ourselves. When we turn to the extent to which we turn our attention towards ourselves, we are thereby withdrawing it from other things. So if we turn our attention towards ourselves so keenly, but we cease to be aware of anything else, we will then be aware of ourselves alone. Being aware of ourselves alone, being aware of nothing other than ourselves, that is the state of pure awareness. So we will then experience ourselves as pure awareness, and thereby ego will be permanently eradicated.
But this is a slow process, isn't it? Because
it is slow because of our lack of willingness to let go. Because we still have desires and attachments for things other than ourselves, we have to wean ourselves off our vishaya vasanas, our inclination to go outwards towards things. That's why it takes time. But eventually, when we manage to turn the full 180 degrees in a moment, that is in a not even a split second, smaller than a split second, the ego will be annihilated.
And this isn't willpower. You don't say, right, I'm not doing that. I'm staying.
Well, what do you mean by willpower? That is generally, we talk about a person having willpower if all their desires are focused in one direction.
Which could be
if I have one ambition and one ambition alone, I want to become a billionaire, and I focus all my energy in that, we call that willpower.
But
all that is a focusing of our will on one thing. But focusing we can have willpower to become a billionaire, or to become a prime minister, or to become a very learned scholar, or to be a great musician, or whatever. We can have willpower to do that if we're focused on that. But that doesn't solve our problem. What we want is to focus all our will on only turning within and being as we actually are. So it's not that willpower means a focusing of our will on one thing. But what is that one thing? Only if our focus is just to subside and be as we actually are, then that willpower is useful. That willpower is called bhakti, love.
So it's linguistics, really. So if I'm focusing my willpower on becoming self-realized, it's about turning within. But you said that's about self-love, which is quite a different sort of energy from willpower.
Well, yes, it all depends on what you mean by the words. Usually willpower, we talk about willpower with reference to desires. Right. We must use our willpower to want to be free of all desires. And in order to be free of all desires, we have to be free of the one who has the desires. So that love just to be as we actually are, that needs to be one-pointed and all-consuming love. If you want to call that willpower, fine. What we call it doesn't matter. Whether you call it love or bhakti or willpower, it doesn't matter. To understand its nature, that is, we must have desire for nothing else but to be free of the one who has desires. To desire to cease rising as the one who has desires. The one who has desires is ego.
Right. So to constantly think, I am not the doer, I am not this body, I am not this mind, is that
is manana. That is it can help to a certain extent. But it's a form of neti. I'm not this. I am not the doer. That is not going to, merely thinking I'm not the doer doesn't destroy doership. In order to, we need to know what we actually are. We need to experience, once we experience ourselves as what we actually are, then we will clearly know we are not the doer. But merely thinking I'm not the doer doesn't solve the problem. I can go on thinking I'm not this body, I'm not this mind, I'm not this speech, and therefore I'm not the doer. I can go on thinking that for any number of countless numbers of births. That's not going to solve the problem. Who am I? That is what we need to find out.
Right.
So thinking about what we are not is not the solution. We need to investigate what we are.
I've had experiences where time just hasn't existed and I just be. And
Yes.
that's not a willpower thing. I can understand what you're saying there. It's just an experience of just somehow everything disappears and you just be. But I can't live my life in that space.
Who is the I who can't live their life? When you say I can't live my life, you're again identifying yourself as Lorraine.
Yeah, I suppose so.
Lorraine cannot, that is, but when you remain as just being, you are thereby separating yourself from Lorraine. Let Lorraine live her life in whatever way. You are separating yourself.
Right. Very subtle.
Yes, it is. Bhagavan's path is a very clear and very simple path, but very subtle and very deep.
Yes.
And that's why it will become clear to us only to the extent to which we put it into practice.
Right.
Merely with our conceptual reasoning, we can understand to a very vague extent, but we can truly understand it only to the extent to which we put it into practice, because it is extremely subtle.
Right. Thank you very much.
It is so subtle, it is beyond the grasp of the intellect.
Yes, I think I've grasped something.
Intellect is useful up to a certain extent, but we have to leave that behind and cling only to I am.
Yes. It's a kind of reminder when you...
Yeah. I mean, so long as our mind is going outwards, we need to be reminding ourselves to turn back within.
Yeah. Great. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you want to ask anything, David?
No, I was just going to say something to Lorraine.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
And Saravana Bhavan, do you want to ask your question?
Greeting, Michael, from Aotearoa here. I have got two statements, and I like your valuable comment on those things. I like to ask one by one. The first one, today somebody asked about some people are against to us, or some sort of toxic relationship or whatever. People who are scolding or angry on us, our individuality. So that means they are angry on our body or in our individual person.
Yes.
So we have to join with them and scold on that, because this is the body that is actually a enemy for us.
Yes.
So they also will be happy, and we also try to achieve our real nature. So that is the good advice for them, how to overcome the toxic relationship or the angry people who are scolding us.
Bhagavan said, our real friends are not those who praise us and appreciate us and are kind to us. Those who abuse us and ill-treat us, they are our real friends. Because what they are abusing and putting down is ego, which is our enemy. So our enemy's enemy is our friend. So all the people who dislike this person we seem to be, they are our good friends. They're helping us to separate ourselves from this person.
Yeah, that is a good way we can approach those people.
Yes,
whether that is our toxic relationship or whatever, they actually one way they are helping us to.
Let us take those people to be Bhagavan in that form, putting down our ego.
Yes, yeah. Then other one, I have observed some other people ask in the previous meeting about some advice. Before that, I want to ask one little question. If we are having a headache, how can we do a self-investigation or self-analysis while we are having a headache?
Who is having a headache? There cannot be a headache. There cannot be a headache without an experiencer of that headache. So forget about the headache. Who is experiencing it? To whom does this headache appear? To me. Who am I? Bhagavan has given us clear pointers. We have to turn whatever we may experience, whether it's pleasant or unpleasant. It appears to whom? To me. Who am I? That is the direction in which we have to go. That doesn't mean we have to ask for questions. Sometimes asking a question may be a reminder, but it's not asking questions. Those questions Bhagavan put, he's pointing out the direction in which we should travel. That is, whatever appears, whatever we experience, it appears to us. So to whom? To me. We turn our attention back towards ourselves. That is the only way to, that is, troubles come in so many forms, headaches and all sorts of physical problems, mental anguish, so many things are there. They will all distract us if we allow our mind to go out towards them. So we need to learn to separate ourselves from all these things by clinging only to I am. So the clue Bhagavan gave us, to whom, to me, who am I? This is such a powerful clue, such a powerful pointer. We should apply this in our life. Whatever may come, whether pleasant or unpleasant, we should, to whom, to me, who am I? We have to turn our attention back to ourselves.
Sorry for interruption. But my question is that teaching is, your teaching is a very high level, but we are not at that stage. Then what we will think, when the headache, we will take a couple of Panadol or Brufen to relieve the headache, and then we can do the self-investigation. That is a simple starting point. Why I am asking this question is because there are some people having intolerable pain, some people having some depression. When we are going to that high level of teaching, what they will think, oh, these are against to Bhagavan advice, so we should not access any medical help to relieve that. So that is not actually going to help for the...
According to Bhagavan's teachings, the disease comes according to destiny, the medicines also come according to destiny. So we have to be sensible. Sometimes if we have a condition, but intolerable pain, or if we have like a mental illness, you say like intense depression or something, sometimes medicines are necessary, or we go off the rails. So nothing is against Bhagavan's teaching, but the only thing is, take whatever medicines may be helpful, but don't just stop with the medicines. The medicines are there to help us with, that is, if the medicine reduces the pain, that may help us to turn within, but merely reducing the pain is not a solution. The ultimate solution is only turning within. But Bhagavan would never say, don't take the medicine. If the medicine is necessary, take it. Because just like the disease has come according to destiny, the medicine has also come according to destiny. We shouldn't misapply Bhagavan's teaching by saying, oh, you mustn't take medicines. Okay, if I mustn't take medicine, then I mustn't take food either. because if hunger comes, that's according to destiny. So I shouldn't take food. That would be a very foolish way of trying to, of misapplying Bhagavan's teaching. So we have to apply his teachings wisely.
Yeah, I have seen some people, they are, whenever that come from some higher position saying, okay, this is the way we have to investigate to whom this is coming. So even they think I should not take medicine. That's the things I have noticed. So I said that also leave it to Bhagavan. In my simple example at the beginning, I said, even when we are having a headache, taking Panadol and then do the investigation. I am not saying not to investigate it. So we have to alleviate those symptoms at the beginning. Then we can concentrate on our self-investigation like that. The intolerable pain or depression or anything, if that is the Bhagavan grace that we need to take a treatment, we have to accept that. That's what my opinion. Yeah.
Yes, it's all according to destiny.
Yes. Thank you very much, Michael.
Yes.
Thank you.
And then Srini,
Hi, Michael. Namaskaram. My question is almost answered with last three callers, Ash, Lorraine, and Sarvana. So I would put it in a way, maybe you can show some more light on this one. So the question is, I practice self-inquiry all the time, and I see two parts. One is self being Bhagavan, and ego being illusory outside Srini. So this is like a self versus Srini, or Bhagavan versus Srini. But every moment, I think we have a choice based on what I heard, what I see it is. We have a choice to be Bhagavan, or we have choice to go out or be like a Srini, like a worldly person do it. But we chose to be a worldly person most of the times. I think it's in practical way. I think everyone admit that it basically it's like a strong Vishayavasanas pulling out and be like a snake or be like a Srini.
Yeah.
But is it? I see patience, practice, perseverance is some of the key elements that I always take as a pointers that Bhagavan gave us. I take it every time. But is it? Do we see the grace? Like I heard the grace all the time. Apart from or in addition to these things, what I'm doing it to be the self or to be aware of the self all the time, like every moment, like turning within inwards. Do you see the grace? Bhagwan's grace is also necessary. But the question is more like, what else is needed, or what else can help me in getting into the state of being aware all the time?
In Atma-vichara, Bhagavan says, Aralam Vainame. In I'll tell you which one. In the final verse 5 of Atma-vichara, Bhagavan says, but basically when we turn with I won't go through the earlier part of the verse, but when we turn within, Anma, which is called Anamale, will be seen, Kaname. Then he says, Aralam Vainame, grace is also needed. So how to get, what is the prerequisite for grace? Ambu Purname. But even that ambu, that love, is given only by grace. But in order to benefit by that grace more and more, we need love. Ambu Purname means adorn yourself with love. Have that love for the more we love for grace, the more we are yielding ourselves to the grace. So the more grace will do its work unobstructed. And what will be the result? Imbu Torname, happiness will appear. So to the extent to which we yield ourselves to the grace, to that extent we will be happy. So grace is certainly necessary, but even our effort to turn within is only by grace that is happening. Even our effort to surrender ourselves is happening only by grace. So as Bhagavan said, grace is the beginning, the middle, and the end. Without grace, nobody could even begin on this path, let alone follow the path or succeed on the path. So grace is all important. But what is that grace? That grace is not something from up in heaven that comes and falls. Grace is what is ever shining in our heart as I. Grace is our own real nature, the love that we, as we actually are, have for ourselves as we actually are.
So that means recognizing or identifying or being aware of that grace itself is, that alone takes us to Bhagavan.
Grace is that which is shining in us as I am. Being aware of I am is what takes us to Bhagavan. Because Bhagavan is that same I am. Bhagavan and his grace are not two different things. Bhagavan is grace itself.
Yeah, the question came from, in this worldly life, like regular life, it seems so real. All these outward things are so real. It's like almost we cannot question them. It's like any family activities or political or social, anything other than self is so real, and it almost like forgets almost every moment. We almost forget, and it doesn't give that kind of pointers to turn within.
Yes, but
only few instances, like in the morning or when we are quiet or when we are looking at Bhagavan, maybe 1% or very, very few instances, Bhagavan gives us the kind of, just reminds us and just slaps on the face and say, oh, you are going far away from this self and just come back to the self. So that's, I see it's like, is it like, it's kind of like the other question like Ash was asking, the practice more and more you go towards this one, it kinds of like, we always see that, even though I'm practicing more and more for years together, I'm not getting there. Is it the outside is pulling me, or is it me, or Srini is holding on to that kind of ego a lot?
The outside world is not to blame. It is we who have the inclination to go to the outside world. So the blame all lies in us. And what you said about the world seeming real, yes, the world seems so real. The more we involve ourselves in it, the more real it seems. Exactly the same is the case. Exactly the same is the case in dream. While we are dreaming, the dream world seems so real. But we need to understand, from where does the world derive its seeming reality? The world seems to be real. That is because I seem to be this body. So because I is real, this body seems to be real. And because this body seems to be real, and this body is a part of the world, so the whole world seems to be real. So long as we experience ourselves as I am this body, the world we perceive through the five senses of that body will seem to be real. So we cannot we cannot give up the reality, but we need to understand that the seeming reality of the world is coming only from us. It is we who give seeming reality to that. So what is actually real, so many things seem to be real, but what is actually real is only I am. We need to discriminate. We need to understand that, and with firm conviction, we need to try to hold on to I am.
So if I summarize and say, if I completely surrender to Bhagavan and let Bhagavan take care of me, will it lead me to that final realization, or will it lead me to that self-awareness?
If you completely surrender to Bhagavan, yes. But how to completely surrender?
Correctly.
Who is to surrender?
Correctly on the drone, but the drone.
Yeah, it is me. It is a illusory or egoistic Srini.
Yes.
So it is basically we have to dissolve the ego, just melt the ego, and after melting ego, it just self remains.
all problems come back to ego. Ego is the root of all other problems. So Bhagavan is very radical. He goes to the root. Radical means
Correct.
going to the root.
Yeah.
He tackles the root.
I definitely see, because I went through other teachings and finally came to Bhagavan. I think it's not me coming to Bhagavan. Bhagavan brought me here into this. Especially, I always remember you almost every day. It's probably Bhagavan brought me to your group, the satsang. I feel it is like, instead of questioning practices and all this, let alone surrender to Bhagavan.
Yes.
Let Bhagavan takes me to whatever the way that he showed me. Completely into Bhagavan's hand is like a fully surrender, right? Like, you brought me here into this world, like in a physical world. You show me the way. You show me the light, and you dissolve my ego.
Yes, that is the right attitude. But we also need to remember, what is it we are to surrender to Bhagavan? It is this false ego.
Ego.
So how can we surrender ego? We need to investigate it. So the surrender can become complete only by our investigating ourselves.
Correct. Self-enquiry and self-surrender.
Yeah, they're inseparable. The two must go hand in hand. Yeah,
it's the same. Yeah. Thank you so much for all the teachings.
Well, all thanks to Bhagavan.
Thank you, Bhagavan. Yeah. Thank you.
Right.
Michael, so the question is, so it says that lots of yogis do practice daily rituals like getting up early, meditation. Does Bhagwan advise something like this? And also, the person would like to know Bhagwan's daily routine.
Bhagavan had no restrictions. That is, Bhagavan, in the later years of Bhagavan life, he was living in the ashram. It wasn't his ashram. The ashram grew up around him. But Bhagavan adjusted himself to other people. So according to the routine of the ashram, Bhagavan adjusted his routine. But Bhagavan has attained everything. But I mean, Bhagavan is the supreme reality. So Bhagavan is not like a yogi doing some meditation or anything like that. Bhagavan, whatever is to be attained, that is the goal we are to attain is the annihilation of ego. That had been achieved that day in Madurai when the fear of death came to him. The ego that was there was annihilated. What shone after that was Shiva himself. So there's no question of Bhagavan needing to do any sadhana or have any fixed daily routine. He adjusted his outer life according to the convenience of other people. That's all we can say. So there's nothing, we can't say Bhagavan was adopting a routine for any purpose other than just to adjust himself to other people, to the convenience of other people. Bhagavan was, because there was no ego there, he was totally self-effacing. I think that I'm not sure if there's anything more I can say on that.
Okay, and the next question, and that's it from the chats for now. The next question is, this is a highly philosophical interpretation of the text. This interpretation points or leads to Ajata doctrine, which discarding all lesser explanations. So I'm not sure if this is so. This is a question. I think maybe some clarification.
Okay, I'll say a bit on that. This is a philosophical thing, but we need to understand Bhagavan's philosophy is an extremely practical philosophy. So we cannot separate the philosophy from the practice, because all the philosophy is pointing us to the practice. So whatever Bhagavan taught us, particularly in his original writings like Nāṉ Ār, Uludunapatu, Arunachastuti Panchakam, all that he taught us has practical value. We need to understand that practical value and apply it in practice. So we shouldn't try and say, oh, this is philosophy, and the philosophy is only as a support for our practice. It all has practical implications. That's one thing. Also, Bhagavan's teaching is not ajata. Bhagavan's teaching is drishti shrishti vada. The reason Bhagavan said ajata is the ultimate truth, ajata is his experience. But in ajata, there is neither a teacher nor anyone taught, nor any need for any teaching, because in ajata, what is alone is. So that is our goal, ajata, but that is not the teaching. Bhagavan gave us a practical teaching. The practical teaching is what is called drishti shrishti vada. That is, everything appears, that is, nothing exists independent of our perception of it. So who is it who is perceiving all this? That is ego. So we turn our attention back within. When we investigate ego, we will eventually find there's no such thing at all. That is, again, people misapply this. People say, oh, Bhagavan said there's no ego, therefore there's no ego. If there's, Bhagavan also said, when ego doesn't exist, nothing exists. So long as we see the world, so long as we are aware of multiplicity or anything other than ourselves, ego seems to exist. So we need to investigate this ego. When we investigate ego keenly enough, we will find nothing, there's no such thing. Since there's no ego, there is nothing else. So the ultimate truth is ajata. But ajata doesn't provide a path, because there's nowhere, and ajata is the goal. So in order to reach that goal, we need to investigate this ego, because everything we experience now is contrary to ajata. Ajata says, nacha or pati, nothing has arisen. But we are constantly seeing a rising happening all the time. So our experience is contrary to ajata. The step from our present experience to ajata is Bhagavan's teaching, drishti shrishti vada. All this multiplicity we see appears to whom? To me. Who am I? If we investigate this I, who is aware of all this multiplicity, that I will dissolve back into its source. We'll find there never was any such thing as ego, and therefore there never was any appearance, any arising, any world or anything. That is the state of ajata. So we shouldn't confuse Bhagavan's we shouldn't take ajata to be the teachings. Ajata is the goal towards which the teachings are directing us. And
I think it's now back to
okay.
Great hands.
Okay, we got three more. Anjali?
Namaste, Michael.
Namaste.
Going back to the analogy of the rope and the snake, which I find very, very fascinating and clear. And we've all been speaking of that really in different ways. So if we investigate from the point of view of the snake, when your identification with the snake, which is the ego, and looking outwards. And again, from this point is Eika Jiva Vada, when there is the, I guess from this point, as the world arises, as the dream arises, is contained in this I vritti. Would you say that is the starting point? And I mean, simultaneously, the world arises as soon as the I vritti arises.
Yes.
And also, so that is looking outwards. And from this place, when we look inwards, as the ego investigates itself, looking backwards, is, of course, it sees only the rope, which is pure consciousness, awareness. And then as soon as that happens, the snake disappears, and the ego disappears, and there is only light. So, of course, then that's the realization that, it was the ego never existed, the mind never existed in the first place. And that is ajata, from, that understanding of ajata. My doubt, not doubt, I just want your clarification now, when Bhagwan speaks of the sakshi, the Sakshi Bhava, the pure witness. Where does that fit in this entire scenario?
Well, Bhagavan did sometimes refer to Sakshi, but it wasn't a term that he used a lot. And I don't think Bhagavan ever recommended Sakshi Bhava, as far as I'm aware. Bhagavan distinguished two senses in which the term Sakshi is used. In the simplest meaning of Sakshi, Sakshi is the perceiver. In that sense, Sakshi is only ego, because it's only ego that perceives things other than itself. So that's one sense. But in old texts, often Brahman or our real nature is described as Sakshi. Bhagavan said, in that sense, Sakshi doesn't mean the perceiver, it means the sanadi, the presence. That is, in the mere presence of Brahman, all this happens. So in that sense, Brahman is said to be Sarva Sakshi. It doesn't mean that Brahman is perceiving all this. So we need to distinguish two senses in which this term Sakshi is used, because otherwise we get into a lot of confusion. If you listen to people explaining Vedanta, that is Advaita, from a more traditional aspect, they will say that the perceiver, the Sakshi, they take Sakshi to be the one who is aware of all this, and they say that is Brahman. No, it's not. Brahman is not aware of anything. Brahman is as it is, and it's aware of nothing other than itself. Brahman is our real nature, what we actually are. What is aware of the world, as Bhagavan says in verse 4 of Uladu Napadu, if oneself is a form, the world and God will be likewise. If oneself is not a form, who can see their forms and how? So what is aware of forms is only ego, because ego identifies itself as a form. I am a form of this body. So forms exist, names and forms exist only in the view of ego. So if by Sakshi you mean the perceiver of names and forms, that is, in that sense, it is ego. If by Sakshi you mean the presence, the pure awareness in the presence of which all this appears in the view of ego, that presence is Brahman. That is another sense of Sakshi. So we need to distinguish these two senses.
Yes, yeah. So I understand it in...
As far as I'm aware, no one before Bhagavan clarified this distinction. That is, we can get ourselves into a lot of confusion if we take a word and think that in every context it means the same thing. The same word has different meanings in different contexts. So we need to understand the underlying principles, then we will understand in this context, in which sense is this word being used? In this context, in which sense is that word being used?
Yes.
So what we need to understand is the basic principles. Bhagavan has given us the basic principles in a very clear and systematic way. In particular, I mean, in all his original writings here and there, but in the most systematic manner in Uladu Napadu, Nāṉ Ār, and Upadesh Undiyar, in these three texts, he has very systematically revealed the fundamental principles of his teachings. If we grasp those fundamental principles, then everything else will fall into place.
Right. Yeah. So, yes, you're right. In traditional Vedanta, I mean, the way I understand it, studying traditional Vedanta as well from time to time, and coming back to Bhagwan's teachings, so I do a bit of both, trying to grasp it from, various angles. So my understanding from traditional Vedanta is when you speak of, it's all a matter of the standpoint. Whose standpoint are you looking from? And of course, meaning changes depending on where you're standing. So when, for example, the example is given of light. Now, light does not need to be aware of itself. It just is. And it is the illuminator. From the standpoint of the world, it is the illuminator. But from the standpoint of light, there is only light. There is no illuminator.
This is another confusion in traditional Vedanta. Often they give an analogy. They say, just like the eye cannot see itself, pure awareness cannot know itself. That is, the eye is jada. That's why eye cannot see itself. Pure awareness is not jada. So awareness is always aware of itself. Bhagavan, this is another confusion you find very prevalent in explanations of traditional explanations. They often say awareness cannot know itself. Awareness knows itself by being itself. As Bhagavan says, Tanai iritale, tanne arilam. Being oneself is knowing oneself. For oneself, there is awareness. By merely being that pure awareness, we are knowing the pure awareness, because pure awareness always knows itself. But the problem is we need to distinguish knowing something as an object or as an object and knowing it. We can never, it is true, we can never see awareness as an object. We can never experience pure awareness as an object. As ego, we cannot experience pure awareness. It's only by being pure awareness that we can know pure awareness. So it is not knowing in the sense of knowing as an object. It is just knowing it by being it. So it's a very much deeper and more subtle form of knowing, but awareness always knows itself. That is, awareness is always, the fundamental form of awareness is the awareness I am, awareness of our own existence. So Bhagavan would never agree if people say pure awareness cannot know itself. He did sometimes say, this is such an awareness that it doesn't know itself. But what he meant when he said that was it is not knowing itself as in the sense in which we usually take knowing, but knowing an object. But he said it knows itself just by being itself. So these are very, very subtle things. We need to have a subtle understanding. If we just take the words, we get ourselves into a confusion. And the problem with traditional Vedanta, particularly because they have all this Shrishti Drishtivada, that is the world is first created out of this, all the Sankhya type explanation of creation. It was taken on by a lot of Advaitins. And so Advaita philosophy was made unnecessarily complicated. And once you get unnecessary complication, you get unnecessary confusion. Bhagavan has simplified it, given it in a very simple and very clear way. So we can understand the heart of Advaita much more clearly from Bhagavan's teachings than spending a whole lifetime or many lifetimes studying all the older texts, because there's too much complication and hence confusion. And then we don't know how to apply that. In a very complicated system, you lose the subtle distinctions. In a very simple system, Bhagavan was able to highlight subtle distinctions. So, yes, pure awareness doesn't know itself in the sense it doesn't know itself as an object, but it knows itself by being itself. That distinction we need to understand there. What is meant there by knowing? Knowing is being. Merely by being itself, it knows itself.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much, Michael.
Right. And then Jean, do you have your hand raised?
Good afternoon, Michael. I don't know if you can hear me.
I can hear you, yes.
Fabulous. You've wrote a book about happiness and the art of being. Yeah. I was wondering if you could mention to us why being alone is the state of happiness.
Being alone is our natural state, because what actually exists is one that is, as Bhagavan says in the first sentence of the 7th paragraph of Nāṉ Ār, Yatharthamai uladu Atma-sarupamandre. What actually exists is only the real nature of ourself. So since there's only one thing, and that one thing is infinite, because there's no other. If there was something other, it would thereby be limited. But because there's no other, it is infinite. And only in the state of infinite existence can there be infinite happiness. So if there was anything other than ourselves, that would limit our existence and therefore limit our happiness. What we actually are is infinite, so there are no others, so there's no limitation on our happiness. So true happiness is found only in the state of kaivalya. Kaivalya means isolation, separation, and the state of pure oneness, that is the state of pure happiness. So long as there's appearance of anything other than ourselves, we are thereby limited, and thereby our happiness is limited. So if we want to experience unlimited happiness, we need to experience ourselves as the unlimited whole.
Can I ask you, Michael, why putting our happiness on objects and things outside of self turn us into bondage and unhappiness?
There is, as Bhagavan said, there is no happiness in any of the things of the world. We think we derive happiness from those things. Why? Because we have likes and dislikes. The things we like, if we get, we are happy. Because we like them, we are restless until we get them. And when we get them, we're happy. Or if there's something we dislike, when it's removed, that seems to make us happy. The happiness is not coming from those things. The happiness is coming from within us. Because our desires, our attachments, our likes, dislikes, and so on, when they are satisfied, we thereby, the mind is thereby, that the agitation caused by the unsatisfied desire is calmed down temporarily, and the happiness that was within shines forth. So happiness is our own nature. Whenever we are happy, whenever we experience happiness, we should look within. Where is this happiness coming from? Happiness doesn't actually come from outside. See, supposing you have a liking for chocolate, put a piece of chocolate in your mouth. Is there happiness in that chocolate? No. The happiness you experience is coming from within you because you have a liking for that chocolate. When you put it in your mouth, that liking is satisfied, your mind is temporarily calm, and the happiness which is within gushes forth. We need to observe these things very, very carefully. Then we will be more convinced of Bhagavan's teachings the more we observe them in practice. So what Bhagavan has taught us, as I always say, it's so practical. But we need to, the more we apply what he taught us in practice, the more we will be firmly convinced, and the more clearly we will understand what he taught us. Does that adequately answer?
Thank you, Michael. Thank you.
Right. And Olena?
Hello, Michael. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, yes.
Great. Yes. I just wanted to ask, make it a little bit clearer. Today, a couple of times, one question was raised about toxic relationship and about, these situations when we can be abused and so on. I just wanted to ask this, that you said that our enemies are actually our friends because they hate our ego. Which I can absolutely agree, of course. But I just wanted to ask whether, it's my opinion. I wanted to ask whether it is correct. Should we allow, I think we should not allow other people torture us unnecessarily. When we can avoid such situations, we should avoid. This question of our enemies are our friends, it's a question of acceptance. So we just accept that other people can disrespect us and so our ego, and that's all. Actually, we should not allow them to torture us or do such things.
That is,
am I correct?
Everything is happening according to prarabdha. If it is our
Yes,
destiny
right.
to be in a toxic relationship, we will be in a toxic relationship as long as it is our destiny. If it is our destiny for that toxic relationship to come to an end, it will come to an end. If we try to make it, if we try to bring that toxic relationship to an end before it is destined to come to an end, we can try, but we won't succeed. So there's no harm. If you think you're in a toxic relationship and you think you can get out of it, by all means, try to get out of it. But you will be able to get out of it only if such is your destiny. So long as it's our destiny to experience that toxic relationship, we have to bear with it. And the best thing to take those who torment us, take it. Bhagavan, there's a verse in Aksharamamlai, Oruvana, right near the beginning. Oruvana munne oliteva varuva unsu de arunachala. That is, wait a second. Oruvanam unne, you who are the only one, is the implication. Olitu ever varuva, who can come in? I think it means concealing you, the only one. This is all your trick. He said that the previous verse was, he referred to the Aimbula Kalba, the thieves, the five senses. So Aimbula Kalba, Ahatilni Puhumbo, Dahatilni Ileo Arunachala. When the thieves, the five senses enter my heart, were you not even then there in my heart? So all the troubles that come out from outside, it is only he who comes in the form of that trouble. If we take it in that way, then we will not be affected, even by the worst of torments. But so long as we allow our mind to go outwards, we will be affected by the torments. And then it may be, I mean, to say you should or you shouldn't avoid, if you feel you can avoid, by all means try and avoid. But if you can't avoid, it's because it's your destiny.
Right, I agree. I just meant I didn't mean only toxic relationship. Actually, I just meant all such situations when people can cause harm. So I mean that if we, I mean this is the question of acceptance. We accept that Bhagavan gives us this situation. Everything, like you always say, that we have to accept it as a sweet will of Bhagavan. But I mean, when we can avoid, we just can avoid. Yes. Like you said, if we can avoid it, we can avoid with, not trying to continue this, not trying to allow someone to create even more and more harm.
Ramakrishna Paramahamsa said, God exists in all, but you shouldn't for that reason go and embrace the tiger. Right. So we need to know what teaching to apply when. So we shouldn't go out looking for toxic relationships. If it's our prarabdha, they will come.
Yes, right.
So what is needed, that is, but whatever happens is according to the will of Bhagavan. All prarabdha means the will of Bhagavan. So everything is according to the will of Bhagavan, and it is good. So if it's good for us to be in a toxic relationship, that will happen. When we have learned whatever lesson is to be learned, or when the time for that to come to an end has come, it will come to an end. So let us leave it to Bhagavan. We don't have to think about whether I should do this or I should do that. He will make it. When it is the time for that toxic relationship to be brought to an end, he will make us do whatever is necessary to bring it to an end. So more and more we need to give up the idea that we can mold our outward life. Our outward life is going on according to prarabdha. The change we can bring about is giving up our likes and dislikes, because it's our likes and dislikes that prompt us to act according to our will.
Right.
To the extent we give up our likes and dislikes, to the extent ego subsides, we are thereby not being swayed by our vasanas, so we are not acting according to our will, and therefore everything is going on according to destiny. Even if we rise as ego and try to interfere, it will still go on according to destiny. But for our peace and happiness, we need to learn to subside more and more and more. That is our aim.
Right, I absolutely agree. I just wanted to explain a little bit why I decided to ask, because a couple of times today it was raised, and to me, sometimes Bhagavan's behavior, for example, or other saints' behaviors, a little bit was confusing. I mean, when they allowed people to actually cause harm to them, just they voluntarily. I mean, when, for example, Bhagavan was beaten or something like this. But there were other cases when, for example, he actually tried, he prevented people from doing something. So I mean that such cases somehow created these questions about how to behave.
We cannot understand Bhagavan's actions. He will act in each situation as is appropriate to that situation. So often Bhagavan, people thought Bhagavan wouldn't behave in a certain way, and he behaved in a certain way. It was according to the need of the circumstances. Because Bhagavan has no will of his own. There's no ego there. So whatever he is doing, it is happening by the mere presence of himself as Satchidananda, as what actually is. Bhagavan never, as I said earlier, Bhagavan didn't actually do anything. Bhagavan never does anything. His nature is not doing. His nature is being. But by his mere being, everything happens. What we see as Bhagavan, that person we see as Bhagavan, all the actions of that person were done by what Bhagavan actually is, just being as he actually is.
Right.
So our mind cannot grasp this. Our mind cannot comprehend this.
Of course, but I mean that sometimes we can take his behavior as some example.
Oh yes, we can learn from his behavior, but we shouldn't think that we can always understand it.
Yes, right. Thank you very much, Michael.
Right.
Thank you.
Right.